think at this point, there are three things that I want to bring up that we should just mention. The term musique concrète, the term sonology, and then your website, because your website, which we're going to put up the link, people can go and see where you do sort of cross over and show your work, which blends and kind of crosses over and doesn't make distinctions so much about what is music, what is sound. Sonology is not going to make the distinctions as much. And musique concrète, which is why I always referred to it as what I thought Foley had a lot in common with, it should expand to include what we do with Foley. And I want to tell a really quick story about the Coen brothers and their use of sound and music in their films. If anybody pays very close attention to a Coen brothers film, what they're going to notice a lot of the time is that it's the sound effects and the Foley that's driving the sound narrative of a film, and that the music is really more of a sound bridge in the film. The Coen brothers flip the use of the two elements a lot of the time, and No Country for Old Men has no music. They rely on, and I know Skip Leavesay very well, who's worked a lot with the Coen brothers, and we're good friends, and he's in one of my books, and he was in my dissertation, and I know a lot about how the Coen brothers work. And they rely heavily on sound and Foley. And the music is very minimal in their films because they do not rely on the manipulative emotionality of music as much as it's a sound bridge, much like the way a lot of directors use music to manipulate, and then the sound effects would be a sound bridge. He does the opposite. They do the opposite. And so what Skip Leavesay always would do with a Coen brothers film is there's a lot of sound effects that create the tension, the emotionality, the environment, and the Foley is very much used to be storytelling. And the music supports the sound or supports a sound bridge. And so they flip the whole thing because they are really thinking outside the box in the way they make film. This goes back to the whole notion of not necessarily drawing distinctions because they're all about the way the ear processes emotional information. And in my interview with Gary Rydstrom, we discussed this a little bit. So I think what we're talking about here, Sara, is opening up our minds to tonality and sonology and the idea that these are sounds, musique concrète, objects turning into something that is different than what they originally were, and remembering that the very first instrument is the voice, and that instruments imitate sounds and voices and other things in nature, and that's how instruments come into being invented. So there's a lot here that you are working with intuitively, and then you've decided to analyze, and then you've decided to put in your work, which is why I think it's important for people to go and look at your website and see the kind of work you're doing, which is really only in its beginning stages because you're still young and you're going to do a whole lot more. Tell me a little bit about what it is you do in Prague.
So I also do mostly post-production, which relates a little bit to our previous topic, but I usually, if I do production sound for a film, I will definitely do the post-production as well, but I do a lot of post-production that has not been produced by me. But what you're saying reminds me also how another aspect of how this acousmatic Foley idea came up is this idea, it's interesting that a lot of many films that did not use music, the fact that they did not use music became, you have No Country for Old Men, you have Roma, same sound person, but it becomes a thing that's like, oh, it's amazing they didn't use music, But so one of the things that I like to work best, and I'm lucky enough to have directors that allow me for that, is, and the longer you work with the same director, the earlier they manage to involve you in the process. So, Michelle Williams Gamacher, who is a director from UK that I work with for about 10 years now, a bit more now, I'm actually part of the script writing process as well. As she has a draft, she sends it to me, and I get to relate myself with the story way early, but also trying to find places and props that can help telling the story and can help creating a sort of emotional bond that is only possible if you're there from the beginning. So it can be the choice of clothing and the sound that the clothes do. Because one important thing, and I was thinking a lot about this while watching your episodes, there are two ways that you can go, that you can try to have these props playing a role in the way the story is told. Of course, when we do Foley, when we do effects, when we edit in post-production, we can change the colors, and we can change how the perspective is more or less focused on certain parts of the screen. But there is an important thing, and Chantal Ackerman, for instance, worked with this a lot. I remember there's a documentary about her films, and one of the actors is saying how long she spent choosing the shoes. And I think I mentioned it in one of my articles too. And the point is, yes, we can replace the shoes after in post-production. We can even replace for better shoes. I love the conversation about rich shoes and poor shoes, like this kind of thing.
Right.
But the point is, the actor is going to walk on those shoes. So if you give an actress a very strong high heel shoe that the actress will be wearing when crossing some corridor, and the sound of her own sound, the sound that she will make as she walks, it will influence the way she will incorporate the character, and that she will feel in the feet of the character. So what I actually like to do is to find props, not necessarily shoes, but I also mentioned it in one of my articles, an example with a Zippo in a Claude Chabrol film. That the Zippo,
the Zippo light
goes, yes, a lighter goes from character to character, and it basically whoever has that Zippo, is the suspect of a murder. There has been some murder, and whoever is carrying the Zippo carries the suspicion with him. And that's what I try to do when I do my post-production, when I do my sound design. I try to have objects, props in the film that will help either developing the story, carrying the story further, or helping, or it will help the audience understanding some emotion that doesn't need to be shown, or doesn't need to be shown with music, or doesn't need to be shown with dialogue. Mm-hmm. So we can show that, especially if you establish the meaning of that sound in a very early part of the film, when you bring it back and back and back, that meaning is already there.
Right.
So basically, I do post-production for films. I also do post-production. I do mostly fiction, real image fiction. But I also do sometimes video art, which is liberating because you don't have to carry all these film conventions, because at the same time, I mean, film has been done a certain way for 100 years because that's how it works.
Right.
It will work this way, right? So,
right.
For instance, going back to the conversation about music, most of the times, if I am to argue with the director, usually is because of the music, because I'm a little bit resistant in overusing it. Maybe we don't need music all the time. You can use less of it. And I will insist for, a different strategy. Maybe building some soundscape, maybe building this relationship with a prop, with something that belongs to the character. Which, by the way, there is this book, Sound Design is the New Score, by Daniela Wilson, who unfortunately passed away already. But she really put forward a relationship with field recordings or concrete music in sound design. If I'm not mistaken, I think she used Gus Van Sant. Was it? Yes, I think so. Gus Van Sant trilogy, and a few other film examples that in which basically the line between the sound design and the soundtrack, as in English you would refer to music, it's not so defined. And you can't really say. Another example that works wonders in my perspective is the sound design of You Were Never Really Here. And it's the same thing. You can't really say, is this a sound effect or is this music? Or does this come from the screen or was it added after? And that's where I find it more interesting. Then, also Daniela Wilson, she had an expression for these, which was aesthetic of reticence, something like this, reticence aesthetics, aesthetics of reticence.
I like that.
Say again?
Aesthetic of reticence or reticence aesthetics. I really like that.
Giving the space for the audience to actually figure out what's happening, what are they experiencing, right? Because, and that also goes how there is a tendency now, because I don't think it's decent that I have to wear my earplugs in a theater, So this idea that you make it loud, you make it overwhelming, you make it hectic, I don't think it has to be like that. But anyway, that's not what you asked me. You asked me what.
Well, actually, I think that's kind of well, no, I didn't. But you know what? You went on to something that I think is kind of important, Sarah.
I have so many things to tell you.
This sense of sound needs to be overwhelming and overbearing in order for it to make a point. I would agree with you that I am in the school of why. And I would even say that that's kind of a masculine approach. And I'll probably get a lot of pushback about that. But it is what I think. I think that is a very masculine approach, that it needs to be more and big and loud and overbearing. And it might be a more feminist approach, and I'll probably get some pushback about that, to challenge the hegemony of a lot of music and a lot of sound and really big and really loud. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And I think it might be it feels almost like a counter-hegemonic approach to start unpacking this and say, maybe we need to rethink this and pull back and say, do we really need music? Why? Because we've always done it. Do we really need loud here? Do we really need to hear the tires screech? Do we really? And I remember watching Baby Driver, which I thought had some really excellent sound choices in it, where what was interesting to me was when he's running through the store grabbing pieces of things to wear. And I actually used that part of a scene for my students to look at and to try to Foley. As in my Foley class at Ball State, I had them use that part of the scene as to discern his character and some precision in the Foley, to get away from loud and bombastic, to get to the precision and the nuance, to show us something about his character from the way he went through the store grabbing things to wear. And the way that he would disturb the carousels that clothes were on and things like that. I think I would agree with you And I'm wondering, since it's women that are asking these questions that you're mentioning, I haven't heard, I do know some men that ask these questions, but they are men that I know in the industry who are against the typical big and loud way of doing films. And they really don't like a lot of music, and they don't like to have it be the manipulative big and loud. And when they go to vote, some of them are in the academy, and when they go to vote, they say, I don't want to hear big and loud. And they like what we call dialogue films, like a film like Road to Perdition, or a film that does really tasty, quiet sound effects that create an atmosphere, create a sense of foreboding. And I think it's more artful. And they do tend to be, by the way, people who went to art school or people who had a different discipline when they were in school. And I think there is perhaps it's going with what's happening, I think, in our culture too, of just loud, 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 loud. So I think this is kind of an important thing to think about. A counter hegemonic way of let's pull back, and do we need that sound? And that's kind of why I mentioned, by the way, the Coen brothers, who are very much not like a lot of what you see. And I really love watching what they do because they so often have a single thing tell a story sound wise. For example, in Barton Fink, you hit the bellboy's bell, and it just goes on and on and on, and it says something very, very important about the story. Little things like that they do. They have a wicked sense of humor, and it comes out so much in their films. So I think you're onto something, and I tend to agree. And then I take it further and say that's a counter-hegemonic approach, and it might be a feminist approach, because I do tend to think that the yang sense of loud, 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 more, more, more is becoming too much. And I have had to put fingers in my ears when I go to a theater and say, really? Really? Why are we doing this? So I wonder if we'll revisit it as a culture. I wonder if we will revisit it, because it's why?
Well, I don't really know, because this is something, it's what I find fascinating in film is how, it both mirrors society, but also pushes some movement somewhere, right? So it's sometimes society also mirrors film.
Yeah.
And, it's, I also evolved like naturally, which was something, it took me a while, but basically, more and more the films that I work for stand also for the things that I believe in the world, in society, or my political position about something. And having those two things getting closer to each other is something that I value very much. And this to say that, my relationship with sound starts basically as a film relationship. And late in my bachelor, I found, I think, there's no other way to put it, but basically I read Audiovision by Michel Chion, and I find out concrete music, and I find out all these, John Cage and other things to sound that in film context I was not taught about. And then I go to Sonology, and I start finding about, sound art in general and field recordings. And, all these years later, I found academics that discuss politics of sound, and I find how sound plays a role in our understanding of our environments and so on. So all this to say that what can we say about going to the theater and having to cover our ears when that's, everyone has their ears covered in public now, either because you want to be in your bubble listening to your own music, most of the times way too loud for what your ears should be taking, or because the environment around you is actually so loud that you want to cover your ears in order to protect yourself from the. But if you, and I'm sure it's the same a bit everywhere. Everyone, and now we even, I'm not even done complaining about people wearing earphones in public and being completely oblivious to what's happening around them, as now actually people don't even wear the earphones anymore. They play it on speaker from their phone. You know what I mean? And this, for me, I don't know if it's because I work with sound that I'm more sensitive to these things, or I'm more sensitive to these things, so I became a sound worker. I don't know what comes first, but it's.
I don't know, and I ask myself the same question that maybe those of us that are more sensitive to it are aware of it. But I think there's a bigger question here, which is, why does somebody feel a need to share their sound? Why have we become such a loud world? There's a need for quiet. Space is important. And what have we become? There's a lot of big questions. And it kind of comes down to technology sells things to people and then they use them, and then it kind of pollutes the entire world. So it's a very big question with a lot of different answers, but I think we're asking the right questions, and I'm hoping more people will listen. The bombardment that's coming from a segment of society that's making a lot of money selling these things, and then we use them, and then we don't think about the effect, is kind of what it's all about. And it's a very political decision.
Yes.
And it's a very monetary decision. And so it's a huge subject, but I am very much in agreement with you. And it's something I talk about a lot in my own life. And where I live is very quiet. I live out in the desert near Palm Springs, but not in Palm Springs. And it's really quiet here. And I'm an extrovert. And I like going to the theater, and I like going to hear music, and I like talking to people. But I don't like the absolute bombardment of sound and people with over-individualistic, constant noise and constant aggressive behavior. I can't handle it. Yes. And I'm not a special snowflake. I just have a sense of balance, and so I live enough away from it. And I spoke to someone in an interview a couple of episodes ago who's leaving Germany and moving to Switzerland because where he lives in Germany is too loud. Mm-hmm. And he's moving to a quiet village in Switzerland, and he's going to rebuild his studio there.
I think we can make a parallelism with film sound. You also had someone in one of your episodes mentioning how he likes to, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but how he likes to watch older films when there couldn't be thousands of tracks and choices had to be made. And then you can really pay attention to, which also was, so the article, the paper that precedes the one you read, I try to look into films and find all these props that were actually telling the story, either by solving the plot in the very end or by becoming so attached to the character, carrying it, that if you hear the sound, I know, I wrote about Edward Scissorhands because obviously he's carrying a sound prop in his hands are a sound prop. In this case, of course, the character is written that way, right? It's not they didn't decide to put scissors in his hands because it made sound, but nevertheless it made sound. And there is a specific scene. This feels so weird to tell it to you, but there's a specific scene in which when he's supposed to be dangerous and people are supposed to be afraid of him, that actually the sound of the scissors becomes more prominent and more,
he's nervous.
Yeah, exactly.
He's emotional.
So sorry, just to make the parallelism with, I think film has both educated and miseducated us to listen to the world. We have weird expectations about how things can sound, but at the same time, we have an expectation they shall sound, they should sound like something, right? So I think it has established, I like the term acoustic spectator, to think, because we always think of the audience as a visual audience, but we are listening too, right? And I like to think that as acoustic spectators, I think, I'm not sure if I'm right, but I think this term is from Albertine Fox, that wrote a book about the sound in Godard films. Anyway, I like to think that film history has contributed to educate society about their surroundings, about the soundscape in their environments. But at the same time, it has also miseducated. And what you were saying about whether this relationship with the technology, or with the showing off technology, because we all have a relationship with technology, but I like to be loud sometimes too, if the story asks for it.
Exactly.
I like to to show off sound too, if the story affords it.
Exactly.
But this idea that there is definitely an association between technological power and, let's say, testosterone, that's gonna backfire on me too. But I said it, it's okay. Which we still have the chance to show it doesn't have to be that way. Show that, yes, you can use loudness, you can use many speakers, you can use all of these if the purpose of it is if it's not just for the sake of using it, right?
Right.
If you're thinking of if it fits the film, like I'm thinking of a specific scene, for instance, that a short film that I did. There's a kid, and the kid is walking through some sort of abandoned house, and she kicks a metal can, in a very large room, empty room, and the director wanted that to startle the audience, wanted it. And I understand, because of course in that specific moment he wanted the audience to be alert, and that was a way to do it. And playing with this threshold of loud but not offensively loud, or not damaging loud, which I think is my responsibility. I'm responsible for the ears of these people that came to listen to what I did. So even when I want to play something loud because it fits the purpose, or there is a purpose behind that, I still need to be responsible for the health of those people's ears.
There's an ecological responsibility. You mentioned Edward Scissorhands. There's a sound studies handbook, a sound design handbook coming out with Routledge this month. And I wrote the chapter on Foley in it. And I start by talking about Edward Scissorhands. And then I end with Batman Returns, and there's a reason they bookend. And it talks about anthropomorphism and zoomorphism, and then there's stuff in there about some theory, and there's stuff in there about some international stuff, and I talk about the apoderi and the flows going back and forth and influencing each other. And there's a lot of, there's some academic stuff in there and some practical stuff in there, but the whole thing about I'm glad that you mentioned Edward. I'm happy that you mentioned Edward Scissorhands, because that was a really joyful experience for me. But also, it's a really important Foley piece because it was so specific, precise, and important to his character and his emotion. And I think when you have something that is a very important Foley design thing that is about someone's character, it really is an important piece.
But I tell you one thing that changed, well, not changed, but influenced a lot my relationship with Foley. And that's, and I think that's in the beginning, that's also why I paid more and more attention to these things. Because, you know, when you don't have many resources, and especially when in beginning, you don't have a studio, or you don't have a budget to rent a studio, you might not even have your own microphones or something, right? So I grew the habit, and I always teach this to my students. And bear with me, just bear with me, because I'm a bit afraid of your reaction. No, I'm kidding. But
Don't.
the thing is, I always tell them to, you know, lunch break during the shooting, or arrive earlier, leave later. It doesn't matter. Don't leave the set without recording the props. If your character is opening a drawer, drinking a tea, doing whatever, don't leave the set without recording that drawer, without recording that glass. Because, number one, they always promise you they're going to give you time to do post-production.
I think that's an excellent suggestion.
I always do it.
It's an excellent suggestion. And, you know, a lot of people have forgotten that they have that choice.
And, you know, you might sacrifice your lunch break and have less time to eat, which
It's a great idea.
It's not very healthy either.
Because you use it.
Yes. And not just that. Not only use it, as you start your relationship with the sounds, you start your relationship with the elements that you're going to have to deal with later. If, you know, things go wild, very little time, or if you didn't have access to a Foley station, you know, if whatever happens, you've got it already.
Yep.
So you've got the, and what I like the most, and this is what, you know, usually, and that's why when I shoot, I post-produce too, and it's kind of my condition. Yes, I'll shoot, but I have to be the one doing the post-production, you know? And the thing is, because when you shoot, you know why you recorded that way. Right. Or you know that, you know, in that take, that thing is not good, but you made a note because you know you have it in a different take. Right. And so on and so on. But also, it is in the shoot, during the shooting, that I personally start having ideas. You know, I'm just sitting somewhere, waiting for the lights, holding my stuff, and suddenly I look and I'm like, what if? And it starts growing like that. And, you know, one of the films, a feature that I made when I was still in the Netherlands, which was very, very independent, and a lot of people in the crew didn't have a professional training. They were not professionally trained to be on a film set. And I sometimes, well, especially in the beginning, I think I was taking everything too serious, you know. So it was some things were a bit uncomfortable. And after a few days, weeks of shooting, the directors and the assistant they were already getting used to, if some sound, you know, would happen, they would look at me and be like, uh-oh, you know, because they were already expecting that I'll be like, we cannot shoot with, you know, whatever. And in this moment, it's a moment, the main character, this was an adaptation of Madame Bovary, the French novel, and, you know, she's walking down the aisle in the church, and her wedding dress had these kind of marbles hanging on it. So as she walks, it starts making a chime sound, you know? And they look at me like, this is going to be a problem. And then I was like, no, this is actually very beautiful, because it was in the church and the acoustics and everything. So, you know, there they go, have lunch, and I stayed behind with the dress, making the chimes and
Yeah.
everything. And then I realized, this is just one example, but I realized in this film, because the novel goes that she's married to a man, but she has two other lovers in the course of her life. And well, spoiler alert, but I guess everybody knows. Um, and then I realized, because there was some other dress that she was wearing with one of the lovers that was also noisy. And 2 days later, we're all in a secondhand shop trying to find the third dress that can also make noise. And I used these three different dresses. We started calling them sound dresses. And I used these three different dresses as a basis for her soundscape in these three different stages of her life, And I was very lucky that the directors gave me that freedom to ask for a take to take a little bit longer, to last a little bit longer, so we hear better the dress, and so we can actually establish it there. And then when we bring it back off screen, it can, immediately bring the memory of that specific lover. So this is what not all the films have that, of course, because not all the stories need it.
But it's nice when you can open your mind and see if you can try a new idea. I think probably what the whole moral of this entire episode is about is to kind of try to stay open to what the actual purpose of using sound and film is about, instead of getting stuck in ruts of what we've done before and thinking that that's what we have to do. We don't. We can find new ways of doing it because it might be a better way of doing it. We can find new ways of using sound. Sound can be something different. It can be, reduce it, figure out what it is, find a new way of using it, and you might find a new idea. And that's actually what this is all about in what you're doing. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. And I think especially, if you still hold onto the very many things that work, because that's how the film relationship evolved. And
yes,
if there's something that we do the same way for 100 years, there might be something right about that. And I particular, because then when I do my performances, my Acousmatic performances, the best compliment that I can hear after my performance is when someone says it sounded like a movie, or when they say I can tell that you work for film, because after all these many years, I might be calling it differently, I might be doing it differently, but I'm still just trying to make a movie without the image. Don't tell anyone, but the relationship.
Your secret is safe with me.
Say again.
Your secret is safe with me.
Thank you. We're only gonna put it on the internet, sure. No, but this relationship with the craft, with okay, this sound is not working on the set, but I know I can make it work in the Foley pit. Or on the contrary, I know this is never gonna work as well. You've had some guests that mention, and I was very happy about that, because one of the wonderful things that is happening in this period in time that we are living, and so full of so many, not so wonderful things, but one of the wonderful things is that we realize how much the value of sharing, So every time I heard one of your guests saying they also like to go and record out there in the world, not everything in the Foley pit, I was like, oh, okay, it's not just me. In the sense of, you sometimes, if you don't know if there's more people doing the same way than you think you're doing it wrong.
Right.
And you have like this imposter syndrome all the time, And I think the great, if you find a sound at some point and you record it with your smartphone in the middle of the street, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because that will be combined with, an incredibly hi-fi soundscape that you recorded with your very expensive microphone. And it's going to be combined with pristine delivery of footsteps in combination, like I think
Yes.
for me is the combination of the plasticity, if you can say it like that in English. It just came out. I'm not even sure. Plasticity, is this a word in English?
Yes.
Okay.
Plasticity.
So the plasticity of it, that's why it's art, because it's plastic, because you can, maneuver it, you can operate it to serve the purpose, which is telling that story in a way that the audience experiences the story.
Well, this is a wonderful way to end our discussion. We've covered a lot, and I want to thank you. And I think down the road someday we'll do another one of these. And I want to thank you so much, Sara.
No, I thank you. I'm so glad to get to talk to you and that we get to share these things. Thank you for the third edition of Foley Grail, because I've been, reading it again after almost 10 years since I read the second edition. And, there's never enough time to keep on thinking and keep on doing and keeping on figuring out how to articulate these. But definitely listening to the podcast and like seeing how the second edition evolved into a third, and the differences and a different understanding, which still needs to hold on to history and like understand why it's done the way it's done.